Now, as the fighting in Europe grinds to a war of attrition, concern is growing about Ukraine's rapidly decreasing stock of ammunition. I talked to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, about what the Pentagon's doing to resupply and train Ukraine's army. What have we learned over the past year?
One is the intelligence collection and analysis, I think, by the United States was very good leading into this. Another key lesson learned, I think, is air superiority. The Russians have never, and even to this day, achieved air superiority.
How could that be?
I would tell you that the air defense system of Ukraine has proven remarkably resilient and effective. And what that has done is denied the Russian the tactical airspace up to 15, 20, 30,000 feet. And that has denied the Russians air superiority. And because they don't have air superiority, that's given freedom of maneuver on the ground to the Ukrainians and allowed them to seize the initiative. Another key lesson, I think, is in the area that we call in the West Mission Command. The Russian army comes out of the Soviet models, and the Ukrainian army came out of the Soviet models, which was a top-down, centralized command and control system, where subordinates had very little initiative, very little tactical freedom of action on the, at the tactical level. And consequently, war is a very dynamic, very fluid situation, very unpredictable, and it gets very, very dynamic at the tactical level. So you got to let subordinates call the plays at the moment in time. That meant when the Russians invaded a year ago with probably about 200,000 troops on multiple axes of advance, that was a very scripted concept of the operation that they had. And it went off script. It went off script because of the bravery, the resilience, the toughness, but also went off script because of the tactical skills of the Ukrainian force and because of their decision-making. The Ukrainian decision-making was much more agile, much more flexible, and it was decentralized.
You've said before that the Russians have already lost the war. What do you mean by that?
Their initial political objective was to seize most, if not all, of Ukraine and collapse that government. That failed. So they didn't achieve their political objectives that they set out to do. They didn't achieve them through military means at the beginning of the war. So they failed strategically. And operationally, they tried to seize the capital. They tried to seize all of Donbass. They tried to seize various other parts of the country. And that failed, too. The Ukrainian people, if you roll the clock back, they've been a free and independent country since 1991. So this is a country who the vast majority of this population that's alive today in Ukraine knows nothing but freedom. And you just don't conquer countries that are free. And they don't want to be occupied. So it was obvious to all of us that the Ukrainians would fight, even if they fought with sticks and stones, even if they fought with just rifles. They were going to fight. They were not going to give up. The Russian army has been mauled, really severely damaged, but the Russian Air Force has not. The Russian Air Force has held back. All these bombings that you see are coming from overland. They're firing their munitions from over Russia.
Why have they held back?
Because of the Ukrainian air defense system. They get shot down. So because the Ukrainian air defense system has been very effective, and the Russian aircraft have been shot down in significant numbers, the Russian Air Force has not entered the fray in terms of close air support, in terms of bringing in their substantial power that they have in their Air Force, because it's just too high risk for them to do that. But right now, the focus right now needs to be air defense artillery and artillery, just basic run-of-the-mill blocking and tackling artillery for this battle that's unfolding in Ukraine. And then they also need tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and those sorts of weapon systems to fight a conventional ground war, which is what they're doing.
How do we move toward an endgame? How do we move toward a negotiated peace?
Well, I think that's up for the Ukrainians to decide that. So what is acceptable to Ukraine, that's territory intact, whatever that answer is going to be.
Is it militarily possible for us to get for the Ukrainians to get every Russian troop out of their country and Crimea?
I don't think it's militarily possible for the Russians to achieve their initial strategic objectives, political objectives, by military means. I don't think that's possible anymore. On the flip side, the Ukrainians, I think for this year, it would be very, very difficult, not impossible, but very, very difficult for the Ukrainians to achieve their political objectives. And their stated political objective is for every single Russian to leave every single inch of Ukrainian territory. I think that's a very high bar. I think from a military standpoint only, that'd be extraordinarily difficult to achieve militarily this year. What is achievable, I think, is significant liberation of Ukrainian territory, and maybe, if we're lucky, touch wood, the diplomats will enter the fray here and they'll get to a negotiating table at some point. I think at the end of the day, President Biden, President Zelensky, every European leader has said the same thing, which is this war will end at a negotiating table, and that's probably right.
My interview with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. Up next, the delicate task America has in this conflict is to help Ukraine while avoiding the next world war. My conversations with Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. You're watching War in Ukraine 1 year later, a Morning Joe special.